Steve, you're here to update us on Assange. I would like to tell you that our last video from this summer on Assange is still waiting for review from YouTube for monetization months later. And you can see the microphone is coming down on my head. But I am going to take us to your website. Well, it's not your website, but the Action for Assange website, so that people can keep up to speed with what's going on. But would you just update us right now? Everyone has been hearing about the ruling that this extradition was okayed by the UK court. So where do things stand?
So in the moment, his attorneys have sought an appeal. There's supposed to be a respondence to the appeal within a matter of days now. Ultimately, that decision is going to be made by UK Home Secretary Priti Patel, who has absolutely zero love for Julian Assange and every reason in the world to want to get him the heck out of her country. The chances of Assange's attorneys winning the appeal pretty slim. In all eventuality, in all inevitability, the likelihood of him being extradited and being on U.S. soil by sometime this spring is pretty high, if not sooner. She could have had him here Christmas Eve if she wanted to. So that's going to start the whole, Eastern District of Virginia espionage court process. There are a number of points that I don't know if you guys have gone over yet, that just really quickly, the whole reason he's being extradited is on U.S. assurances that they won't put him under specific conditions of torture once he's convicted. All of the assurances assume conviction. None of the assurances have anything to do about his pre-trial confinement in the Alexandria Detention Center, where a number of people have already committed suicide, where Chelsea Manning was being held and then held again and then held again, where she tried to commit suicide. Jeremy Hammond was held there. He's had nothing but vitriol to say about the conditions and about how they treat the inmates there. That's where he's going to be spending the entire time that he's waiting to go to court. While he's in court, that whole process has zero quote unquote assurances from the U.S. government, which are, of course, worth less than the paper that they're printed on.
I want to play this quick clip because, in addition, I'm curious about your thoughts on media coverage of the news that you just shared. So Glenn Greenwald posted this, I think, a week or so ago. Let's listen real fast.
That I gave you so you can see how easily and constantly these news corporations, the employees of these media outlets, these media corporations lie to the public constantly. So here's the 2-minute clip. Please just watch it with me from start to finish.
The politics of this, as a prosecutor, you're given this case and you've got a guy who's stolen thousands of documents, pages of highly classified national security documents, release them to the world, and in so doing, put the lives of U.S. troops, of people who were working with the United States, allies, collaborators in war zones, in the gravest of danger. Under any scenario, you take politics out of it, and this is an open and shut case. This is not the Pentagon Papers. This wasn't Times editors rifling through documents, figuring out what could be released and what couldn't be released and explaining it. This was a guy that got stolen documents and gave it to the world.
This is a pretty simple case. It's very straightforward. And the beauty of a trial, Joe, is that you narrow all of the extraneous stuff to the charges that are there against the defendant. And the charges in this case are that he was trying to hack into our military information that protects not just our country, but all the men and women in uniform around the world. This is really serious stuff. Forget about the politics. The fact that both the right and the left don't like Julian Assange or love Julian Assange, and depending on the circumstances is being talked about, that should tell you all you need to know. This is really a guy who just violated the law. And
I'm going to stop it there. There's so much to talk about already. So the first thing that Greenwald went over was this. He hacked into or he stole. So could you tell us the argument against that talking point?
Yeah, in 2013, Chelsea Manning was court-martialed. That court-martial took an excruciating amount of time. Kevin Gostola, who's a friend of mine, I think friend of this show too, he was in the courtroom every single day reporting at the time for, I believe, Fire Dog Lake. And in this court-martial, it was dragged out into military court that not only were the materials that at the time Private Manning were those materials accessible to everyone at that rank, every single analyst at that rank, where it was just sitting on U.S. military computers for potentially hundreds of thousands of people to view. It did not require a username or password to access. Anyone at that rank could walk into that building where that computer was, open it up, and there was the Iraq war logs, what became the Guantanamo Bay files, the collateral murder video, just hanging out. What else? Oh, Cablegate. All of those low-level diplomatic cables that got Hillary Clinton, giggling over the extrajudicial murder of a journalist and publisher, they were sitting there relatively completely unprotected, did not require a username or password. There is no hack to speak of. No hack took place. No hack could take place. The thing that's under question is the thing that they tried to go after Greenwald for, which is providing a journalistic source with methods that they can cloud their identity, which is something that journalists have done for the entirety of the profession, is source protection. They're holding this under, this is the 18th count for Julian Assange. First 17 are all under the Espionage Act of 1917, which, again, Julian Assange, Australian, not American. I don't know why he's getting charged with our Espionage Act. They won't give him any of the other, affordances or protections of the U.S., but will charge him with a 1917 law. This is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act charge. The law that Congress wrote after they watched the movie War Games and got scared. That's a real thing that happened. Congress watched War Games, hacked the planet, and got scared and wrote the laws that govern how you behave on the internet. I'm not kidding.
That's new information to me. I did not know that. Actually, I'm glad that you brought up some of that, because I'm going to go to my locals page real fast, because it was never on my radar that we were being tapped to spread high level propaganda. And it's interesting now when you pose that possibility to journalists who are still in the corporate game, how quick to react as if that is the craziest possible thing you could ever say would happen. So these are all the questions, and I should take this opportunity, if you want to get questions in for interviews, I always post them ahead of time on my locals page, aliceamaro.locals.com. It's my way of bringing the questions to the people and letting you ask them yourselves, because actually, you know what, Steve, I found a lot of people have better questions than I do anyway. So let's see, here we go. Steve, please talk about 3-letter organization figures working in the media.
Well, I mean, this is something that you don't even need to slap on a tinfoil hat for. First of all, there's a fantastic book by a guy named Joel Whitney called Finks, Finks. The subtitle is How the CIA Tricked the World's Best Journalists. And it is a history from basically the formation of the CIA from the ashes of the OSS. And its primary function, in the early days at least, was to capture media outlets and create media outlets in Europe and in Asia. And so it goes through that history and walks us up to around the Church Committee, which, 1975, pretty sure, but the audience would be familiar with this. But it was one of the first times in U.S. media where it was disclosed just how thoroughly the intelligence community had infiltrated, influenced, and then outright captured what was the corporate press of the day. To assume that that just went away is fairly silly. But we know that in 2012, Barack Obama signed into law in the National Defense Authorization Act, the Smith Modernization Act, which cut out the loophole from allowing people who were national security officials, military officials, people from the Pentagon, essentially all forms of weaponized propaganda could now be freely expressed on the airwaves as part of the news without having to disclose that there were ties that this individual had to the national security state, all while media is being sponsored by, brought to you by Pfizer, brought to you by General Electric, brought to you by Lockheed. Yeah, and so it's not only are there codified into U.S. legislation mechanisms for three-letter agencies to deliver narratives through individuals without having to disclose who they are, but we know from extensive reporting from a number of different outlets, most recently, I believe, the Gray Zone, where they found that there's a whole section of YouTube, which, by the way, if anyone has ever heard of BreadTube and looked at it for 30 seconds and not come to the immediate conclusion that this was a federal operation, I have a bridge to sell you. But I mean, there was extensive reporting on this. There's a book on it out from Caleb Maupin a couple of months ago about how this is an intelligence operation. I influence that not just the United States intelligence community, but the Five Eyes in general, as well as the Mossad, have in media can't be understated, especially after the wrap up of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, because we can't forget who her father was, along with an Israeli super spy, was a media mogul. Owned, I think, the second largest chunk of media in the UK for a number of years. That's impossible to ignore.
We will get to the rest of this video in just 1 second, but before we do, what better gift idea that allows you to support my work and free speech while also having a robust glass of Malbec and a piping hot cup of coffee? First, check out Allison with 1lwinepromo.com. You get 50% off some of my favorite high-altitude Malbecs from Argentina, and one even comes from the oldest vineyard in Argentina. Plus, you get 50% off shipping. They pair very well with the desserts you will be having with Grandma while you debate all of the hottest topics around us right now. Or, speaking of hot, have a hot cup of coffee with twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, also with 1L Allison. These are high-altitude, shade-grown, USDA-certified organic Nicaraguan roasts. The CEO and founder of the company lives right there in Nicaragua, where they grow, harvest, and roast the beans. There's also a Caturra tea. If you're a tea drinker, this is tea that you make out of the coffee fruits. You can have it hot or cold. I like to cold brew mine for 24 hours. Both options, the hot or cold, very good, as are the coffees, as is also the wine. So check out my sponsors and toast to free speech. The coverage of this case and several others, I think Epstein was another example of this. People made the point that often we look at media and we think money is the driving factor, but I think you could make an equally valid case that control and power is the driving force. And I think this is reflective of that. Maybe you disagree, but there is a lot of popularity, I think, in questioning Assange's imprisonment. And if they really cared about just what was popular making money, you would think you would hear more from that viewpoint. It only seems to make sense to me that you don't, because actually that control narrative is more important than money, than ratings in that particular case. What do you think about that?
Well, Julian Assange's case represents the end of a free press globally. Again, this is an Australian citizen with an outlet registered in Iceland that's being held in the United Kingdom on behalf of the U.S. to be charged under the 1917 Espionage Act. That 18th charge, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act one, the one that will criminalize source protection and journalism, effectively ends investigative journalism. All activism hinges on an activist's ability to communicate their message to a larger audience that isn't familiar with it or doesn't know enough about it. So it doesn't matter what your cause is. If the press goes away, if the free press goes away, so does your activism, because you're just shouting into a tin can. Media, this thing that we're doing, that's gone. You'll still have YouTube. YouTube will be the corporate news platform on the internet that it's been becoming over the last 5 or 6 years, really since Gamergate. So it's I don't when you're looking at it in terms of why isn't media responding in a natural way out of self-preservation, they are responding out of self-preservation. They're making a determination in real time to work for the state under the guise of, maybe being a real journalist that will maybe get some leaks from a state approved leaker, and have an internal shakeup to settle an internal political squabble or conflict. We see that a lot in mainstream journalism and corporate journalism. But what we don't see are the whistleblowers who shake the foundations of these systems and of the giant corporations. So I have a feeling, at least in the tech sector, in the national security sector, in a lot of different avenues of covering war, people know what the Assange case represents. And they know that if they want to continue living the lifestyle that they do, they want to continue living, maybe period, then they either don't say anything, or if they do say anything, they pull a Mehdi Hassan and be like, this scumbag is the most awful person on the face of the planet. He's horrible. He's terrible. But we should probably not do that thing with the press, because that's pretty important. It's right. And that's Mehdi Hassan's take on it every time, and it's not just Mehdi Hassan. I'm just using that as an example.
Why does that happen with like that? I hear people do that with the vaccine, the COVID vaccine too. It's kind of the same phenomenon. It's like, listen, I got the COVID vaccine. I think the COVID vaccine's awesome, blah, 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 blah. But, and it's like, why do we have these lead-ins for certain topics where the person feels like it's necessary to tell you their personal beliefs ad nauseum before they push back on what's happening? Like, what is that? Is that signaling to the mob, listen, don't come for me. All right. I'm one of you. I'm just saying that, this, but I'm not one of those people.
The culture demands a qualifier.
Yeah.
If you don't have, if the woke mob or whatever, segment that you're trying to communicate to, if you don't do, what is it? If you don't genuflect correctly,
it's a good word.
You'll be done for. And so that's what that is. And plus, all of these people have seen what's happened to us. They've seen what's happened to Archie. They've seen what's happened to Ryan Christian. They've seen what's happened to Whitney Webb. They've seen what's happened to doctors and experts, high-profile journalists, authors, researchers who've stuck their neck out to be like, hey, shouldn't we at least be asking questions? Don't you dare ask questions. On to the boxcar, buddy. No questions for you. Questions are treason.